Thank you so much for joining us for our session C. In today's session, we are going to be covering both the programs for foster youth, which I will be doing. We'll take a short little break and then we will continue on with Middle Class Scholarship 2.0. My colleague Adrian will be covering that, and that wraps up the 3 days of our Cal Grant Regional Training. Thank you so much for being with us today. As you can tell, your audio is muted just to eliminate any sort of background noise. If you have any questions while I am presenting, please don't hesitate to type that in the Q&A window. My colleagues are ready on the line to answer any questions in real time. Please be as detailed as possible. If you're referring to a particular slide, they might not know which slide you're talking about, so if you can include as much information. And we've also sent the PDF of these two modules that we're going over, I believe by yesterday. So please check your spam or junk box. And if you did not receive it, just reach out to us at training@csac.ca.gov and we will get that to you. And then, of course, at the end of today's session, if there is time, we will definitely take any questions if you have your hands raised. These are the session topics for today for the programs for foster youth. We're going to be covering all the different programs that we administer, the foster youth verification tool, talking about the Chafee grant, the awarding process for that particular grant, web grants for college. So if you're administering it, all the different reports and tools that are readily available for you, and then web grants for students, what the students see from their end. So let's jump into this. Foster youth programs. So let's talk about some of the different programs and some of the different changes that have happened in the past year. So we know that for the 24-25 academic year, we have the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which approved a change that affected the Chafee grant program. So for the one thing, Chafee payments made to any eligible student will not be treated as any other financial assistance. This is really beneficial to the students. Any payments will be excluded from the need analysis and total aid formulas. Schools will still need to verify SAP, and students still need to be enrolled at least half-time in order to receive the Chafee. And Chafee awards will no longer be included in the student's middle class scholarship award determination. So these are all really beneficial to students. You can read more about it in our GSA 2024-12. Let's continue. So talking about foster youth and MCS, Governor Newsom had signed Senate Bill 142, which makes various cleanup changes to the budget trailer bill that had passed earlier this year. So this includes language that clarifies that emergency assistance awarded by an institution-based foster youth support program that is under $8,154 can no longer be considered financial aid for the purposes of calculating the middle class scholarship amount. So some students were negatively impacted in their MCS award outcome by these emergency grants, but the 2024-25 fixed amount for student contributions will then be $8,154. The foster youth student's initial MCS award will definitely reflect the base amount, which includes the proportionate reduction, but we'll see an augmentation to their award later in the fall term. So this is definitely something that you'll see on the online roster and data file, specifically talking about emergency assistance. Now, for preliminary eligibility, the following three programs do have specific criteria, so it's important that students identify that on their financial aid application, whether they're applying with the FAFSA or the CADA. So these are the sort of questions that will appear in the student dependency section. So to be preliminarily selected for the Cal Grant B for foster youth or the foster youth access, students have to identify themselves as foster youth. So what they'll see is at any time since the student turned 13, they were in foster care, or the student has children or other people who live with the student and receive more than half of their support from the student now. So that is for students that have any sort of dependence, and this was an increased access award that we implemented just a few years ago. So to talk about the Foster Youth Access Award, the foster youth, Cal Grant B for foster youth. This is a particular Cal Grant that is for students that even if they utilize a September 2nd deadline, this is the only cohort of students that can utilize the September 2nd deadline, which is normally for a community college Cal Grant. They can still receive the high school entitlement Cal Grant, um, as long as they do have a high school GPA on file. So that is definitely one of the priorities. So the student just has to submit their financial aid application utilizing either the March 2nd or September 2nd deadline, have a high school GPA on file, and if they were in the foster care system for at least one day from age 13 and up, they would then qualify for Cal Grant B for foster youth. Now, the benefits to Cal Grant B for foster youth is that their maximum eligibility increases from 4 years of Cal Grant eligibility to 8 years of full-time eligibility, which is really great news. And students would be eligible for this until they turn age 26 of July 1st of their award year. Also, these students would also receive the Foster Youth Access Award. So this Access Award would be an increased Access Award. So as you know, the Access Award is normally at 1,648. For students receiving the Cal Grant A or B, that would increase to up to 6,000. Whereas if you have any students receiving the Cal Grant C, their Access Award would increase to up to $4,000. So it's the same criteria for the Cal Grant B for foster youth, in which students just need to make sure that they've been verified that they were in the foster care system for at least one day from age 13 and up. And from there, they can receive this Foster Youth Access Award. And for any students with Cal Grant B for foster youth, they would receive this Access Award for 8 years that they are also receiving their Cal Grant, which is really great. I mentioned briefly students with dependents. You might have students that have dependents that they're providing more than 50% support for. And it's the same increased access award of up to 6,000 for Cal Grants A and B and up to 4,000 for Cal Grant C. Now, the only thing is students cannot receive both students with dependents access award as well as the foster youth access award. They cannot receive both. So it is always going to designate to one of the awards. So if you have Cal Grant B for foster youth that are indeed have dependents, they might receive the 800% of student with dependent eligibility. If they don't have dependents, then they would just receive that 800% of the foster youth access award, but they cannot receive both of them. Okay, so when the students, submit their financial aid application, they're checking that they are indeed we're in the foster care system. So this is where students would then do the foster youth verification tool for federal on-campus aid. It's a new tool that we developed in partnership with the California Department of Social Services to identify any foster students who were in the foster care system from age 13 and up. And these are for the students that would be eligible for campus or federal foster programs. So this is what it would look like within your web grants. So the foster youth verification tool identifies any foster students that were in the foster care system from age 13 and up. I do want to point out that this is not needed to verify your students for Cal Grant B for foster youth or Chafee grants. We already verified the students on a separate end, but this is if you want to verify your students for any federal or campus aid. So in this case, you would just search the student under CSAC ID, and then it would pull them up and just confirm the date that the foster youth eligibility was received. If you receive the message, foster youth verification has not been verified yet, it's likely going to mean two things. So one, there might be a discrepancy in the demographic data. So maybe the student's name doesn't match, or maybe the date of birth is off. Maybe the student had flipped the month and the day on their application and whatnot. So maybe that could be one of the reasons why it doesn't pull the students up. The second could be that the student is not on your roster, meaning they didn't list your school on their financial aid application. And so here at the commission, we're working to create a verification process for students that are not automatically verified using this tool, but it should hopefully be able to pull up some of the students on your roster. That way you can then verify that they were indeed in the foster care system. Let's jump now into Chafee Grant. So as you know, Chafee Grant is a federal program. It does pay $5,000 annually to help foster youth pay for college or career technical training. It is administered by the Commission through an interagency agreement with the California Department of Social Services. It is federal and state funded grant subject to annual availability of funds. I always tell students that Chafee Grant is the only one that's a portable grant, meaning it can be used at out-of-state schools, whereas Cal Grants can only be used in the state of California. So what is the eligibility in order to qualify for the Chafee Grant? So it is for current or former foster youth living in the foster care system for at least 1 day between the ages of 16 to 18. And in this case, kin gap, non-related legal guardianship, and adoptions would not be considered eligible. And in order to receive the Chafee Grant, students have to be under the age of 26 by July 1st of their award year. Now, whereas Cal Grant eligibility is 4 years, Cal Grant B for foster youth is 8 years, the Chafee Grant itself is up to 5 years. And any schools that even administer a payment to a student of $1 or more, that would be considered 1 year of paid participation. So you'll notice that, the Chafee Grant is a little bit different from our traditional, Cal Grant, et cetera. So you'll notice that Chafee Grant applicants do not have that March 2nd deadline that we usually call our priority Cal Grant deadline. Applications are accepted through July 31st each year. Students do not need to have a social security number. They do not need to have graduated from a high school, or there does not need to be a GPA on file. Males do not need to register for selective service, etc. And this grant itself goes to the student to pay for college or career technical training and other related expenses. So students could technically use this for rent or housing, transportation, childcare, books, any different programs. It does not need to be an undergraduate program, and they can use this out of state. So what does the awarding process look like for the Chafee Grant? So in order to be considered for the Chafee Grant, the student needs to do 3 things. So the first thing is they do need to make sure that they're submitting their financial aid application, whether it's the FAFSA or the CADA, every year that they want to be eligible for the Chafee Grant. So that is an application that has to be submitted annually, and especially if they're attending a California school, they should be, submitting that so that they can also receive the Cal Grant. For the Chafee application itself, they only have to submit that application 1 time. They can access the application at the website chafee.csac.ca.gov. And then from there, in partnership with the Department of Social Services, they will be the one that will verify the foster youth status. It's always going to be electronically verified within a month of the student submitting their financial aid application, as well as the Chafee applications. Once the student has been verified, it will say verified, and we'll have that in our system. To find more about Chafee eligibility, when you go on our CSAC website, we have a whole page designated specifically for our Chafee program. So it talks about the eligibility, but it also includes any forms that students might need. So there's going to be times where the students might not be automatically matched through the Department of Social Services. And so students can submit the foster care verification form, which is an online fillable form. They'll submit it to their ILP coordinator or probation officer, etc. And that way we can, quicken the process for them to then be verified. So, and if students need to make any sort of changes to their Chafee Grant, form itself, there's also a designated form. Maybe they got married and need to update their name, maybe they moved, or maybe they transferred schools, in which case they would need to submit this form to our Chafee coordinator, who would then update that information for them. So this is what the form looks like for the students who want to be manually verified. So this is the process. So the first step is that the student would, access this form. They would complete page 1, and then from there they'd submit it to the county. From there, the county is then going to complete page 2 and then forward that to CSAC. Our CSAC staff members will then process the form and then submit it to the Department of Social Services. From there, the Department of Social Services will verify the student's record and return the form to CSAC. And then from there, we will update web grants to show that the student is indeed verified as foster youth, and hopefully then they will get processed for the corresponding awards that the student would be eligible for, whether it's Cal Grant B for Foster Youth, Foster Youth Access Award, or Chafee Grant. From there, once the students completed all their different criterias, they don't necessarily get awarded immediately. Chafee is one of the few awards that does have a priority awarding hierarchy. So what is the first tier? The top tier is any paid renewal students. Those are the students that have already received the Chafee. They're going to get priority as a paid renewal. The second tier from that is any new applicants and non-paid renewals who will be 25 years old at the start of the award year. We want, because they're so close to being aged out of the Chafee grant, they are going to also get priority in terms of receiving the grant. Next is going to be non-paid renewals. So there might be students that are indeed eligible for the Chafee, but they are not yet awarded. They haven't received a payment. They are, of course, going to get the priority. And last but not least, it's new applicants under the age of 25. So a lot of high school seniors that are starting college for the first time, they might see within their web grants for students that they are indeed eligible, but not yet awarded because they're at age 18. They have not yet moved up that tier. So this is what the priority awarding hierarchy looks like. All right, so now let's talk about web grants for colleges, how to administer the Chafee grant. Hopefully all of you have web grants access. This is where you would find all the information that I'm going to show. There's a designated Chafee section. So from there, you'll be able to look for student application status, institution reconciliation, the payment roster, student lookup, etc. So let's look and see what those slides look like. All right, so here, this is where we would start with student lookup. The student lookup screen allows users to search for Chafee awardees on your campus by either a partial name, their date of birth, or even their email address. So in this case, you're just looking up a student whose last name is Garcia. Maybe you just want to pull up all the students that are at your school and it would populate with that. If you want more information to open up the student information record, you would just click on that eye icon under the column View for any of the students that you're double checking. So if you need any more advice on how to search for students, the yellow box does give, advice in terms of making sure that you use the correct date of birth format. It tells you to enter at least a minimum of 2 characters for their first or last name, etc. Let's now look at the payment roster. This section is really going to talk about the eligibility and payment reporting process. So you're going to notice that we emphasize the need to report ineligible students as well as your eligible students because it will hopefully help more eligible students receive that. So we're going to go over the process in the next few slides. All right. So while schools are great about certifying eligible students, a lot of them do not regularly certify ineligible students. And because the Chafee grant really relies on recycled funds, It's really essential to make sure that those funds continually move. So we need to do that by withdrawing and recycling those funds to waitlisted students every week. So we need to make sure that you're certifying ineligible students consistently every week of every term. So that way we can initiate the recycling process and help other students get paid. So another important aspect of the recycling and reawarding process is that it really increases award utilization, which is a good thing and can impact future Chafee Fund allocations. Higher award utilization means that more students benefited from the funding and that more students were served. So hopefully that, shows that we need to continue to receive Chafee funding. And just as a reminder, we really want to make sure that we're certifying and requesting a payment in the same transaction since only one transaction is permitted each week. So as you're going through that process, make sure you're just doing it all at the same time. So when we talk about not certifying, the impact of not certifying, we want to remember to report ineligibility for students who are maybe not enrolled at your school. Maybe they're not attending less than half time. Maybe they've already completed their program. They're not making SAP. But uncertified awards will be withdrawn and recycled to eligible waitlisted students. And this is how it shows up for any fall winter terms. They will be withdrawn 30 days after awarding. For spring, 21 days, and then for summer, 14 days. So the reason why, if you don't certify fairly quickly, your students' awards will be withdrawn. They could lose the award. And, as we saw through the awarding hierarchy, at that point, your student has, worked up the tier and hopefully should be eligible to receive payments. If there is any sort of delay, 6-week delay or longer, the funds might not be eligible anymore because it could take that long for a student's award to be reinstated. And then you have to go through the process again of requesting the payment. And then once the check is then sent to be received and then disperse the checks to the student. And because of that, if there's any sort of delays to students receiving their checks, they might not be able to pay for their classes. And because of that, they could be potentially dropped from their classes. Maybe they aren't able to pay their rent, their childcare. And, that's why it's really important that we're certifying our students, making sure that we also then pay them so that they are receiving their Chafee grant in a timely manner. Chafee award status. So all eligible students are going to be placed on the school roster, whether they've been awarded or not. So any web grants users can then click search to see all of the different award statuses. And then from there, you can choose a specific award status. So let's look at the 5 different award statuses that you could see on your roster. So the first one is awarded. So this tells you that the student has a preliminary award offer. So once the eligibility has been certified and the payment requested by the college, a check will then be sent. So that's really great. The student hopefully will be certified within the time limit before their award will be withdrawn. The next is eligible, not awarded. So what this is the student is eligible. They met all the different criterias, but they're not yet awarded because maybe they're just on the bottom tier of that awarding hierarchy. So, it's really just a matter of waiting and seeing. The student is essentially, now on a wait list. We know that they're eligible. It's just a matter of moving up that wait list, which is why it's so important to certify you're eligible as well as ineligible students. So we're constantly, withdrawing awards from ineligible students and then recycling it out to an eligible student. The next award status is pending. This is where there's any sort of pending transaction that's going to process on Monday evening. Paid in full lets you know that the student was paid on all eligible terms up to their unmet need. Of course, as we know, the yearly maximum Chafee award amount is $5,000. And then, of course, there's not awarded. So maybe the school certified that the student was ineligible for the particular award. All right. So after clicking search, if you are maybe, choosing a particular award status, the student records will then be displayed. You're going to click on the blue image of the eye next to the student records under View to open that particular student's detailed roster. So a good rule of thumb is to always work your roster every Tuesday because, as you know, we process everything on Monday. So that way on Tuesday, you've got that roster ready to go for any newly awarded student. So here, if you're checking your roster, you'll see the award status highlighted in that red box. And if the students are indeed awarded, it will show the award status date right next to it. The Chafee payment roster does have 5 different sections to it. So let's go over some of the different sections of the payment roster details. That is the section that will show all the student demographic information that was pulled from either the FAFSA or the CADA. Then there's the ineligible section used specifically to report annual level ineligibility. And then there is the eligible section that is going to be reporting the term level eligibility or ineligibility. You'll notice several pre-populated fields. Those in white can be overwritten if the data needs to be modified, such as education level, SAI, unmet need. The college costs of attendance will come from the annual cost estimate forms that were submitted by all the different colleges every October. Now on the box to the right, that is where you'll see request payments. This is where schools are going to select the term or the terms for which the student is eligible for a payment. So as long as they are more than half time, they should be eligible for payments. And then lastly, in the bottom section, this is the reminders and resource section where you're going to find the Chafee Quick User Guide. This is a really helpful resource that outlines nearly every different payment scenario, including how to report ineligibility at the term level and as well as the annual level. So if you haven't done so, definitely check out that Chafee Quick User Guide, print it out, have that readily available. And then, of course, if you are stuck on a student and or have issues, definitely reach out to our Chafee coordinator. You can email at chafee@csac.ca.gov or even call our school support line where option 3 will get you to our Chafee coordinator. All right, so certifying eligibility. So in order to be eligible for a payment, students need to make sure that they're enrolled in a program of at least 1 year in duration. They need to make sure that they're attending at least half time, they're making SAP, they have sufficient unmet need. And so once they meet all those qualifications, you can certify that the student is indeed eligible. And from there, you can request payments for any of the eligible terms, and then make sure you're saving that transaction. Once it's saved, it will then reach out to the state controller's office, who will then process and transfer the Chafee funds within 3 to 4 days. You can review the student application status screen for the different claim schedule information. All right, so this is the section of the roster where eligibility is certified for awarded students. So note that there's no need to certify eligibility for students who are not yet awarded or eligible, not awarded because we know that they do not have a Chafee grant. Certifying the roster for students who are still waitlisted creates rework for you. So ultimately, let's hold off on doing this until the student is actually awarded. So let's talk about the different parts. So here, it's the terms attending. So it's going to auto populate based on your school's term schedule. So obviously, if you're a semester school, it's going to populate with fall and spring. And if you are a quarter school, it should auto populate with fall, winter, and spring. Next, it's going to talk about the student's education level that was self-reported on the student's financial aid application. You can update this per your institution's EL policy. And last but not least, this is the request payment, where you would then certify the student's eligibility and request the payment in the same transaction. As we said, only one transaction per week. And so we want to make sure that we can do all of this all in one go and make sure you are saving it before we go to the next page. All right. So here, the bottom section of the roster is where schools are going to request payments. Request payments for all open terms for which your student is eligible. So remember, you have to certify eligibility and request a payment in the same time, same. That way, you don't have to wait a whole week for you to then process it. So what's in parentheses is the date that the roster opened for the term payments. Then from there, you're going to be able to check the particular term. Now, if the checkbox is shaded, a payment cannot be requested because maybe the term is not applicable to your school. So obviously, if you're a semester school, you're not going to have a winter term, so that would be shaded. Maybe CSAC has not yet opened the terms for payment, in which that's why it would not be eligible for you to click that box. And maybe you've indicated in terms attending that the student is not eligible for that particular term. So it shows that the student should not be able to receive a payment. And so these are the three reasons why you might not be able to choose a particular term. If you see that gray box and wonder why, go back to these different reasons and ask if it's one of these. And here within WebGrants, we're now going to talk about certifying ineligible students. So as you know, we have many more eligible Chafee applicants than there are Chafee funds, which is why we always need to be working the recycled funds from ineligible students. And that way we can then put them into the hands of eligible waitlisted students. When reporting annual level ineligibility, choose one of the four following reasons. So you don't need to choose more than that. It could be because the student is not enrolled. Maybe they're not enrolled, more than half time. Maybe they've already completed or graduated from the program, or they are not maintaining SAP. So you would first click one of the reasons why they are not eligible. Now, remember, if you are putting that a student is ineligible due to not maintaining SAP, make sure that you are complying with the relaxed SAP provisions under SB 150. So in this particular example, the student was reported as not enrolled. Since the student was not enrolled at the start of the school year, this is an appropriate use for the annual level ineligibility. However, if the student maybe attends later, maybe in that same fall term, all you have to do is just go back in and unclick that box and click save in order to put that student back into the pool for award consideration. So typically these students would then be re-awarded the following week. So now let's look at how to report term level ineligibility on the next slide. So to report a student as not attending, or maybe they're on a leave of absence, attending less than half time, not meeting SAP, or otherwise ineligible for payments for that term only, simply uncheck the box for the corresponding term in the terms attending section and click save. So in this example, the spring term was unchecked, which means that the $2,500 that had been held in reserve for this student for the spring term will then be recycled to the next waitlisted student. So it's really that easy. All you have to do is unclick that box, and then that amount, the money will then just be recycled to the next waitlisted student. But let's say the student regains eligibility later on in that same spring term. Yet again, all you have to do is recheck that spring term attending box, recalculate maybe the student's cost of attendance, SAI, other need, etc., confirm their education level, and then from there, save. This will then reinstate the student's award and will put them back into the pool of other eligible students. And as I'd mentioned before, it should maybe take a week, hopefully, to then add the student back to the eligibility list. Our web grant system will then reprioritize them based on the awarding hierarchy, and hopefully the student should then be reawarded the following week. You should be able to certify them and pay them the following week. Chafee and SAP. So I had mentioned earlier SB 150. So, for some of you that are familiar, SB 150 went into effect on January 1, 2020. and it allows students to receive the Chafee grants for up to 2 years before becoming ineligible due to not making satisfactory academic progress. Colleges are responsible for implementing this provision by adapting their SAP policies accordingly. So, essentially, in a nutshell, SB 150 requires college campuses to support Chafee recipients who are in jeopardy of losing Chafee funding due to not meeting SAP by creating an education plan that directs students to on campus services such as tutors. College financial aid staff should review the full legislative text to solidify your understanding of it. Make sure that this is in your school policy. SB 150 students are allows students to receive Chafee grants for up to 2 years, so before they are deemed ineligible due to not making SAP. All right, and now let's look at the student application status screen. So many financial aid administrators will really only use the payment roster within web grants, but it's also nice to familiarize yourself with this screen as well. All right, for any of your, Chafee financial aid administrators out there, this is the screen that you should be a little bit familiar with. It's the student application status screen. There's 3 different sections. There's the demographic section, application status, and the correspondence. So let's talk about the first section. The first section is demographics, which is fairly easy. We're just talking about the student's name, date of birth, address, their school of attendance, anything that might have been pulled from the student's financial aid application. You can use that little caret on the right-hand side to drop down all that information for the student. The second section is the application status. This is where WebGrants users can see at a glance all the different green check marks. This lets you know that all of the different components were completed. So we know that the student did submit their Chafee grant application. We know that they were indeed verified by the Department of Social Services and that they did submit their yearly financial aid application. In this case, it's their FAFSA. And this is where you would say we want to make sure that we're seeing all green check marks. And then in the last section is the correspondence records. This allows you to see any sort of correspondent records that have been sent to the student, as well as any school changes or even any CSAC recycled awards. So any sort of changes you'll notice in the comment section, what was the action that was performed or taken. So whether the ILP form was received from Department of Social Services, the application submitted an email notice to the student. So this is just a really good way to track the correspondence with the student. This screenshot tells us here that something is missing. So ideally, we want to make sure that we're seeing green check marks all the way, but we know that that doesn't always happen. So in this case, we know that the student still has not yet been verified by the Department of Social Services. And, if you're working with the student says, for sure, I was in, the foster care system from this time to this time. Well, if that's the case, all the student needs to do is just submit their foster care verification form. I showed you the slide earlier that goes through that process where the student completes it, sends it to the county, who then sends it to CSAC. So it is a bit of a process, and it might take a little bit longer, but hopefully that will then help the student get verified by Department of Social Services. So then that yellow exclamation point will then get changed to that green check mark. So here on that same screen in the green highlighted area, you're going to see when the student was preliminarily awarded. So in this particular case, here for the 23-24 year, you can see that the student was preliminarily awarded in the spring of March 25, 2024. From there, the next list is when did the school certify the student? So in this case, the school was really on it. They certified the student the next day. And then once the school has certified it, the last section is when the state controller's office has their claim schedule generated for spring term. So in which case that the student would receive the check issued on May 2nd, 2024. So this is the same process that is repeated every term for any students that are indeed eligible to receive the Chafee grant. All right, and here let's talk about any dispersed or return payments. As you know, the final step in the Chafee process is to report all Chafee checks that your campus receives, whether it's dispersed to the student or even returned to the commission. Here, as I'd mentioned earlier, this is our Chafee EFT webpage or just Chafee Grant for Foster Youth information in general. We thankfully were able to process Chafee now through the electronic funds transfer. For the longest time, it was a check process. So this will hopefully speed the process in which your school receives the money. Your school can look up your claim schedules to determine which students were paid via the institution reconciliation screen. This is where you could also see how to return funds via EFT. And then if your college is actually not yet enrolled in EFT, definitely put a request in to enroll in EFT. For institution reconciliation, for all payments paid or returned, this should definitely be reported on the institution reconciliation screen. So many schools are not using the screen, but it is required and will help you when reconciling your books at year end. Using the screen, you can easily confirm whether or when a payment was dispersed or when it was returned to the commission. So what you would do is you would, use that drop down menu to search the different parameters. In this case, you could check recipients per claim scheduled, and then from there, your school code, and then it will populate with all the students that received a payment within that claim schedule. Now let's talk about web grants for students and what your students will see. We really emphasize how important it is for students to check web grants for students, not necessarily on a daily basis, but at least on a weekly basis, because this is how we communicate with students about their Cal Grant, Chafee Grant, their middle class scholarship. And so these are the screens that they will see from their end. So here you know, each of the different awards, such as Cal Grant, Middle Class Scholarship, Chafee Grant for Foster Youth, they'll have their own row of these particular boxes. So you'll notice that it's broken up by academic year, and then there's separate boxes. So for application status, the student sees that it's incomplete, and when they click on the details, it will populate and show them what is incomplete. So for this particular student, we know that they have not yet completed their financial aid application, so maybe they still just need to submit it. So it's letting them know that it's incomplete. We know that they did submit their Chafee application, great, but they have not yet been verified by the Department of Social Services. So in which case, they should complete the foster care eligibility certification form so that way they can hopefully get verified by the Department of Social Services. All right, so once there, let's say that the student completed all three components, great. Under the application status, it's green, which lets the student know that all of their different sections are complete. They have their school of attendance. Students should be able to hopefully list the school that they're attending. But as I'd mentioned before, Chafee is a portable award, so they might not be able to find an out-of-state school if they are indeed, attending that school. So if maybe you are a out-of-state school that is administering the Chafee grant and you're not familiar and your school is not listed on our web grants portal, then just email our Chafee team at chafee@csac.ca.gov, and that way we can help you set that up. Of course, from our end, our team will need proof of enrollment for the student, the name and address of the school, and any sort of financial aid contact information. That way we have that readily available. And I had mentioned that if the student has any sort of changes to their demographic information, maybe they got married, have a new last name, maybe they moved addresses, students can use the Chafee update and change form. And from there, they should be able to, send that information in to our Chafee coordinator. So it does say to mail the form to our address. So you'll see it's to our Specialized Programs Operations branch, I would also, just in case things get lost in the mail, I would also take a picture of this or scan it as a PDF and email it to our Chafee coordinators just in case, and then mail it off just so that you have a backup form that, was completed and you don't have to go through that process again. So this is for any students that are making any sort of changes to their demographic information or to a school change, etc. And overall, how can you help your student? How can you best help your students? We know that foster students face many challenges and they usually typically have the greatest need of all our different students cohorts. So we want to make sure we do everything we can to help these students. So these are just some of the tips and reminders that will keep Chafee funds moving and into the hands of students who need them. So the first one is just to work your roster on a weekly basis. Make sure you're reporting both eligible students and ineligible students. We mentioned before how important it is even to certify your ineligible students because that essentially recycles their award and then awards it to, a student on the wait list. Make sure you're also subscribed to our CSAC lister for any sort of, operations memo or special alert, especially regarding our Chafee program. And then, of course, if you're working with students, just to make sure to have them be their own financial aid experts. They can't necessarily rely on us to do everything for them. We want them to check their Web Grants for Students portal, on a weekly basis just to see if there's anything that might be pending or anything else that they might need to do. So it's important that we just remind them that this is how they check on their awards. And if you have students that are fairly new to the application process, either for financial aid in general, the FAFSA or CADA, or even the Chafee applications, please know that they can seek assistance at any Cash for College workshop. So whether your school, nearby high schools, or even CSAC, we host various Cash for College virtual webinars. Students can seek out the one that might be in their area or even, a virtual Zoom Cash for College by clicking on the Cash for College website and then making sure that the students complete all of the different applications that they need. We know that they need to make sure that they're filling out the FAFSA or the CADA on an annual basis. The Chafee application only needs to be completed you know, once and for all. That's it. And the student doesn't need to go back and fill out the Chafee application every year. And then, of course, if your students need additional support, please refer them to any sort of campus organizations that could help them, whether they need tutoring services because they're on SAP, whether they might need additional food pantry or meal vouchers or CalFresh, etc. Have them seek out additional support if they need it. Here are additional foster resources. As you know, we work in partnership with the Department of Social Services. They have lots of different financial aid resources, high school graduation alternatives, etc. Lots of great information. Then, of course, there's the California College Pathways. They also have campus support programs and foster youth liaison contacts, housing resources, just lots of really great information. And of course, there's John Burton Advocates for Youth. We all refer to them as JBAY. We do quite a few workshops here and there with them, and they also have lots of different resources, education, housing, health resources for your students that maybe were in the foster care system. So these are just really great resources, not only for you, but also for your students. And then I want to leave you with our Chafee unit's contact information. As I mentioned before, definitely you can always reach out to them via email, but if you want to talk to them, you can reach out via phone. That same phone number is our school support phone number. All you would need to do is just click option 3, and that will take you to our Chafee coordinator. Now, before I wrap up, I am going to leave you with our resources section. Normally, we save this for the very end of the webinar, but I'm going to do this because not everyone administers the middle class scholarship. So if you are at a school that does not administer the middle class scholarship, you do not need to stay for the second half of today's webinar. You are always welcome to if you want to learn more about the program. But I am going to do these resource section, and then we're going to take a short break, and then Adrian is going to continue today's webinar with the middle class scholarship, and that wraps up the 3-day Cal Grant regional training. So let's talk about some of the different resources available to you. Registering for our CSAC listserv, I mentioned before how important it is just to sign up for these particular emails so that way you're getting up-to-date information. It lets you know if our web grant system is down, if there's been any changes to the state budget and to that would impact our program. You can choose specific listserv for, say, the foster youth cohort of students, or you can receive emails specifically for high schools or for college. I just think that it's really valuable information that that way you'll be as up to date as possible with all the different programs, all the different updates, any different outreach events that we are hosting, you would get that notification so that you can register for them. Just really valuable information. Of course, our CSAC outreach and training has lots of different programs and lots of different things. You are attending our regional training. It's a 3-part series, and thank you so much for joining us the past couple days. We are soon, I believe, going to be posting our 2025 regional training schedule. So definitely check back to that. We also have YouTube training videos. This video is being recorded. We are hoping to upload all the different videos on our website soon. That way you can always go back to it if need be. And at any point, if you ever feel that your school site, your college site might need a specific training, you can always reach out to our training team at csac.ca.gov to ask for a training request form, and we can see if we can create a designated webinar specifically for your site. We have the Cal Grant Handbook. So, I know that this webinar is focused specifically on the Chafee Grant, Cal Grant B for FOSS Youth even. The Cal Grant Handbook has been updated. I know that there's been so many changes to our financial aid programs in the past couple of years. So definitely check that out. And it can help you provide guidance in terms of student eligibility, as well as the awarding process and disbursements and reconciliation. So it's really thorough and really handy to go through. I'd mentioned Cash for College workshops. So even if your school site does not necessarily host one, you can always refer your students to attend one nearby in person or even virtually. Or if you're interested in hosting one, definitely go to our Cash for College workshop and see how you can be a participating organization. And please know that we also have CSAC Train the Trainer workshops. These are designated so that we can help any community partners, schools that maybe aren't so familiar with the financial aid applications. And we're essentially providing all the different things that you would need to host your own Cash for College workshops. Really great information. So you can also check out our Train the Trainer webinars. And of course, we have our CSAC social media toolkit. So these are just various media and graphics that we have available on our website. It's, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So there is, different social media toolkits, especially one for Chafee Grant for foster youth. So definitely give that a look. And of course, follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Our outreach and marketing team has done a really great job of putting out short little reels that are really helpful to students and their families, as well as administrators, about, the different aspects of our financial aid programs, or even just about the FAFSA or the CADA applications. And at the end of today's workshop, you should receive a certificate of completion. However, we are going to ask that you complete a survey first. So you'll receive an email asking about feedback for this particular session. You should hopefully have already received surveys for session A, session B, and now session C. Once you've completed all 3 sessions, you can then email training@csac.ca.gov. Let us know which sessions you attended. Not everyone is able to attend all 3 in a row. Maybe you attended the one that we had maybe back in September. so you can mention all the different dates, and then from there, we will for sure send you out a certificate of completion that you did attend our workshop. All right, looking at the Q&A box, I don't see that there's any questions that have come in. Please don't hesitate to keep asking questions. Please use the Q&A window. That way we ensure that the questions are being answered. The chat box tends to not be able to show all the different answers to everybody. And I see that you've not received surveys for the different webinars, we'll make sure that we double check that those are being sent out. And you can always email training@csac.ca.gov and just let us know that you haven't received the surveys, and we will make sure we get those to you. All right, everybody, that pretty much wraps up the first section of today's webinar. We are going to take a quick 8-minute break. It's about 9:57 right now. Let's come back, reconvene at 10:05. So we can have you guys go get some coffee, go stretch, go grab a snack. Thank you so much for being with us. Please keep asking any questions in the Q&A window. Thank you so much.